What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm the Croc Nick, and I am back finally with some States of Metal. Kind of took a break from these. It was namely just to catch up on all the stuff that I bought in terms of like collection updates, but I want to cover a whole bunch of states that have smaller scenes to start out with, and then eventually we're going to get down to some states that have some absolutely huge scenes to the point where I will probably be covering them multiple times. But that is for the future. Today, we are going to Idaho. I know, generally you don't think about metal when you think about Idaho. You probably think about the same thing that I think about when you think about Idaho. Potatoes. Like, potatoes everywhere. Potatoes as far as the eye can see. And I am in no way talking about the people there, even though I love calling people potatoes almost as much as I like actual potatoes. Going into this one, that was legit all I really knew about Idaho. But of course, I wanted to look up some stuff going into this, and I mean, there's some interesting little tidbits of information. It is known as the Gem State, and I thought that was interesting because, you know, here in Ohio, Dayton is known as the Gem City. And lo and behold, they have a Dayton too, but ours is bigger. But probably the only real difference. Well, they probably have like mountains and shit. All right, we don't really have those here. I know that Napoleon Dynamite was shot there. That's cool if you like that movie. I'm really not a fan, though I will admit the whole scene where the farmer shoots the cow in front of the whole passing school bus full of children is fucking hilarious. But outside of that, the rest of the movie just kind of annoys the hell out of me. The state also technically invented Furbies. If you remember those little talking, I don't know, spyware fucking creatures in your house where you could teach it to mimic you and say phrases. I don't know. My mom had one. I thought it was weird. I just made it a point to like never talk around it. I'm not big on conspiracy theories or anything like that, but I do know some people in the past that were like, no man, these things are like government spies and they watch your house and blah, blah, blah. I was like, dude, we're not that interesting. Legit, the government has probably bigger projects to waste money on. One thing that I found very interesting, and I was actually pretty shocked, and I'm sure if you've seen a map of the United States, you might be a little shocked too, is that Idaho has a seaport, which the state's landlocked. So you're like, well, how the hell is that even possible? Well, apparently in Lewiston, I guess there's enough riverways or, you know, waterways that are wide enough to actually transport goods that go directly out to the Pacific. I did not know that. I would have never guessed that Idaho had a seaport, but I learn weird things about every state that I go over, so I'm honestly not too surprised, I guess. One interesting first that Idaho had was it had the first city lit entirely by atomic power, the city of Arco, which in terms of things that I really wouldn't want to be first for, that would be kind of high on the list. Now, Arco is probably, you know, a good test-sized town since it has a population under 1,000 people. So if something really, really went wrong there, they could probably just say, no, what town? That Arco? No one's ever heard of that. Seriously, that crater has always been there. Now, I really don't like dig much into like state birds or state flowers or anything like that, but their state fish, the name intrigued me. Their state fish is the cutthroat trout. That fish has got warrants, probably. I feel like if you give a fish that handle, there has to be a story involved, and unfortunately, I couldn't find anything interesting about it. They were just like, yeah, that trout looks like a mean son of a bitch. And speaking of fish, that's a good segue into the weird laws, because that's one of the most fascinating things I always find when doing these. And one of the weird laws involves fishing. It is illegal to fish from the back of a camel or a giraffe, because those things happen in Idaho. Maybe it started off as like no fishing from horseback, but then someone saw pictures of camels and giraffes, or they went to the zoo or something, like, you know what? We better write some addendums for these just in case. Another interesting law is, well, I mean, of course, cannibalism is illegal unless you have an excuse in Idaho. And I really want to hear some of the excuses. Now, I figure that this happens with such great rarity, or at least I fucking hope so, that, you know, there probably isn't a long list of like people that committed cannibalism and just said, well, listen, Bob was just sitting over there looking delicious, and, you know, we were snowed in, so, you know. But I also kind of hope there were just, like, you know, other ones, like, yeah, you know, the pizza was late, and, well, you know, I had to eat. I also found out that in the town of Pocatello, it is illegal not to smile. I don't know how the hell they enforce that, and it's going to be kind of weird enforcing that, because it's hard to be stern with someone where you have to smile all the time. That just comes across as fucking creepy. And I believe in the same town, it actually might have been statewide, public displays of affection are limited to 18 minutes. So I don't know if there's like a smiling cop with a stopwatch watching you make out with your girlfriend or whatever. But again, it just seems weird. What's not weird though is they have a pretty cool, thriving, but small metal scene there. And spoiler alert, all these bands are from Boise because it is the most populous city there, and that's where you'd figure, bands would spring up. But yeah, I have a small handful of bands here that I really think stand out in their scene, and I'm going to kick off with one that I don't actually have physical media for because finding physical media for at least the album that I really like by this band is kind of difficult. And that is the band Ingrown with their album Gun. This is, again, a Boise, Idaho-based metallic hardcore / grindcore band. I saw this band at Full Terror Assault in 2023 and they absolutely crushed. Their style of metallic hardcore is very much in the line of bands like Terror and definitely nails. You have blast beats, it's thrashy at times, all the songs are short and vicious. In fact, I think this whole album is under 15 minutes and there are no songs above the 2-minute mark. But this entire short run of an album is a no breaks run. Every song in here is just full throttle. Again, D-beats, grindy, vicious guitars. There's almost like an HM2 sizzle on them. They're thick, they're sludgy. Every song is just meaner than hell. It's a good solid vocal delivery that's kind of halfway between like a hardcore sort of like roar or bark and like just a touch of death metal to it. When it comes down to their metal side, it's definitely more along the lines of thrash. You get like a ton of machine gun riffs and again, just like fast-paced D-beats. But the hardcore breakdowns are distinctly very old school. Like a lot of like single kick, syncopated chugs, like the stuff that you would hear in, again, like Terror or like Sick of It All and stuff like that. But this is just like chest beating, hyper aggro the entire time, and I absolutely loved it. And there's actually like some cool moments where they kind of mix it up a little bit. The song Shell alternates between like a good 4/4 time stomp and then these just vicious blast beat sections. So again, you get those like little grindy accents in their songs. Songs like Fool and Hard Time definitely kind of lay more on that hardcore side too. You get some good two-step chugs on Hard Time. Fool has like more flat-out punk riffs, like you don't get a lot of that more like metallic energy on them. And despite how fast this moves, there's good pockets of groove. You get the good classic hardcore build-ups with those big like tribal war drum floor toms. This is pretty much like metallic hardcore that I think any metalhead could get into. Like this is the kind of metallic hardcore where if you slip up and call it metalcore, they're gonna quickly correct you because like it doesn't sound like As They Lay Dying or Killswitch Engage or anything like that. This is more just vicious, kind of like old school hardcore energy with like more like extreme metal sort of like mixed in there, and I flat out dig it. It's awesome. It's so awesome that I hope they reissue it because they did just get signed to Closed Casket Activities, and I believe they have a new album coming out in 2025. So I'm hyped for that, and again, I'm hoping they reissue this album as well. They also have some EPs too. This band is just flat out awesome. Again, if you were a big fan of Terror, Nails, I would say like Blood for Blood and maybe like a little bit of Earth Crisis too, check this band out and looking forward to hearing more from them in the future. Next up, Infernal Coil, Within a World Forgotten. This is the first and only full length from this Boise band. I don't even know why I bothered saying Boise there. They're all from Boise. And it had been a while since I listened to this one, mainly because, oh my God, this is so dissonant and ugly and heavy that, it's like kind of that Portal thing where like, all right, I can listen to this, but I'm not going to like listen to it multiple times. Otherwise, it's going to feel like my skull is full of fucking hornets. This is blackened death metal / like grindcore / dissonant death metal. It is loaded with atmosphere. It is scathing and sizzly and just absolutely horrific sounding at times. The Portal comparisons, I would say, are pretty accurate. I would even go as far as to say that this band is kind of like the US's Portal, even though I think there's other bands out there that kind of contend for that position, but trust me, if this band's in the mix, it's just they haven't put out anything in a long time. The atmosphere in here is just horrific at times. You have waves of droning tremolos. Again, they're very dissonant and atonal. The production here is absolutely scathing when they're going for that just flat out heavy sound. There are moments where they do kind of drop out into I wouldn't say like melodic sections. I would say like more ambient sections. It kind of gives, the song a moment to sort of chill and I would say like kind of resurge and build up energy before it just flat out attacks you again. The vocals are inhuman and very distorted, and every single member of this band, which I believe this band is a three-piece, they're all doing vocals. The drum work on here is frantic and chaotic as hell, like just absolutely insane blasting and crazy turnovers. And the flow of this album is very interesting. It comes in just absolutely insane, almost without warning, like a jump scare. Wounds Never Close, and then the following track, Continuum Cruciatus, are kind of like a hybrid between like death grind and war metal. I'm not the biggest war metal fan, but that's just insane heft and atmosphere. It feels like you're listening to TV stack at high volume while someone is like throwing a drum kit down the stairs and Satan's screaming in your ears. It is just absolutely suffocating and dense and inescapable. But as the album goes on, it sort of opens up a little bit more. Probably the biggest track on here, at least in terms of time, and actually in terms of scope, 49 Suns is over 10 minutes. And while it definitely includes a lot of like just distant atonal riffing and just maniacal growls, crazy blasts, it does have a whole section where it drops out to this droning acoustic passage. It has this sort of like weird background hum to it. Honestly, it kind of felt like moments that you would hear on like Neurosis, Souls at Zero, or Enemy of the Sun. It's softer, but it's more dark and unsettling than it is like lush and ambient, where it like, kind of like draws you in more. It's mostly there to let you know that the darkness is still creeping around you, and it's just, getting a breath. That isn't the only like post-metal-ish moment on here. The song Bodies Set in Ash and Death has a good post-metal build to it. Kind of sounds a little bit like Cult of Luna, but overall, I would say, like, if you're a big fan, again, of like Portal, Mitochondrion, Titan Blood, Triumvir Foul, I would say is also a good one too, and a little bit of like Incantation too. Like there are some like good chuggy death metal sections to break up the absolute dissonant madness on here. But yeah, if you've never checked this one out and you're a fan of any of those bands, I recommend it. Like this is probably the heaviest album on this entire list, and at least as far as I have listened, this is probably the heaviest album to come out of Idaho, like, ever, until they probably put out a second full length, which, yeah, they're long overdue for. But yeah, check it out. Barn Habitat. This is the second album from this tech death / death metal, progressive death metal act. I initially heard about this band with their first album, and I tried to find that one, and yeah, like copies of that go for an insane amount apparently. But I heard a lot of buzz about them, mainly because they were super young. I mean, they still are super young. And of course, the album was really good. It was very much like, old school death metal, like lots of like death and like autopsy worship in there. But this one apparently represents a recent shift in the band style, and very much still in line with death, though this is more like later death and Atheist and bands like Horrendous and Hemotoxin. This is technical death thrash, but it's not like just noodles and wankery. This is just excellent songcraft, great riff work, amazing leads. This is absolutely amazing. This sounds more like 90s technical death metal instead of like, the more modern stuff where, like Necrophagus became like kind of like the big influence. This is more, again, like lined with death and Atheist and stuff like that. Lots of angular riffs, crazy drum work on here. Like this kid, and he is a kid, like he's young, is absolutely incredible. Amazing, tasteful fills, like some jazz fusion flourishes, and the riff work on here as well is just flat out amazing. The songs are very intricate, lots of crazy transitions, but none of it feels too cluttered with like just, pointless transitions and just riff changes and noodles. All this feels well-paced, well thought out, and at least in comparison to their first album, the songs are much longer, which is good because all these interesting transitions, they give the riffs moments to breathe. They don't just like constantly keep changing without like really solidifying sections and delivering a solid riffy hook. There's some crazy syncopation all over here, especially on Induced Sadism and the title track. Ancient Animosity has these like really clever pick slides they throw into the riffs to kind of give them like a little bit more flavor. There's even like a more electronic end to that song too. And I think some interesting vocal choices. Like vocally on here, I think it's pretty solid. You get a good alternating, low growl, high scream. The higher screams definitely have a lot of like Chuck Schuldiner to them, and the lower ones are just like good, solid death metal roars. But on Ancient Animosity, there's a couple of vocal takes on there that, I don't know, they sound more like a orgasmic moan. I mean, it's different. It definitely caught my attention. The big standout on here overall, though, is the song Cave. It is 13 minutes of just insane riff work, well-paced songwriting. Again, these kids are kids. Like, they are super young. Like, some of them are still teenagers, but they're writing songs that honestly feels like seasoned veterans in the scene would write. The only thing I could really knock this album on is maybe just like one minor production issue, and it's mostly just induced sadism, where I feel like there's like a dynamic range issue. That song sounds quieter than every other song on here, so maybe it was mixed a little bit differently. But that's it. Like, everything else on here, I think, is absolutely amazing. Again, if you're a big fan of, again, like Death, Atheist, I would say like Watchtower too. There's a little bit of stuff in here that reminds me of Gorguts as well. Check this album out, check this band out. I hope to hear a lot more from this band in the future, because this band has just so much fucking potential. But yeah, check them out. Texas Ketamine, self-titled. I don't know whether it's like specifically Texas Ketamine. I figured they would go with locally sourced ketamine in Idaho, but whatever. Anyway, this is a brutal death metal act out of Boise once again. This actually features a couple of members from Barn as well, though stylistically I would say they're pretty far apart, where this is just more groove-laden, brutal, lots of like, more slam-oriented breakdowns, but it's kind of like more old-school brutal death metal. Like, this doesn't remind me a lot of like modern slam bands. It reminds me more of like, stuff like Suffocation and Broken Hope. I'd even throw in Internal Bleeding in there. The production here, notably a little bit more raw, almost demo-ish at times. This sounds more like it came out in the 90s than it did in 2022 when this actually did come out. But that's the kind of brutal death metal that I generally gravitate more towards. Like, I like stuff that kind of sounds like closer like Deeds of Flesh rather than, a lot of like more modern brutal death metal acts. There are still some more modern brutal death metal acts that I dig, but this has like maybe a more nostalgic appeal. It probably has something to do with the production too, though I will say it is a little bit muffled at times. Sometimes the vocals do get buried, especially the lower end vocals, but those high screams do cut through the mix and kind of have like a Glenn Benton-ish sort of quality to them. But what I dig about this is just groove and just heft, the big-ass gnarly slams that show up on Nailed to the Cross, The Sacrifice, Prime Rib. I don't know necessarily what that one's about, whether they love Prime Rib or maybe it's like a clever reference to Adam's rib being pulled and creating women in the Bible. Who knows? I really didn't read the lyrics. I just know that song is just heavier than hell. But that song, as well as songs like Slaughtered State of Mind and When Blade Meets Bone, they have like some like hardcore-ish influences, especially in the grooves. Like some of the breakdowns kind of have like a little bit of that, hardcore meets death metal sound, like Creeping Death and such. There's even some gravity blasts that show up in that song. There's a lot of different elements that this band whirls into this very primal sound, and a lot of the songs in here are very short. Sometimes they're a little transition happy, but I kind of just like the energy overall. You get some moments of transitional atmosphere to break up the songs, like the electrocution, just, some ambience, and, well, I mean, it's like appropriate ambience. I think it sounds like some dude just getting fucking zotted to death. And the song's self-titled, like, literally, it's called Self-Titled. It's a little bit more melody to it, some thrashier riffs as well. This is a pretty solid offering, and admittedly this is kind of like a newer band that I got into. I saw it was on Maggot Stomp. I ended up snagging it, and instead of covering it in a collection update, I figured, hey, there's not a lot of bands from Idaho, I might as well cover it in this. And honestly, this is pretty solid. Now, this band, I believe, is on hiatus already. I believe their singer left earlier this year, so I don't know what the future holds for this band in terms of like, a follow-up or anything like that. Plus, again, they are splitting members with Barn, and I mean, if I had to pick between the two, I kind of want to hear more from Barn than I do with this band. Not to say this band's bad, but Barn is like insanely good. But if you're looking for something more on the brutal death metal side that's kind of akin to like a lot of stuff that, Maggot Stomp has put out over the years, 200 Stab Wounds, and again, some earlier brutal death metal stuff, again, like Broken Hope, Suffocation, stuff like that, check this out. It's a pretty solid listen. And finally, I'm going to close this out with a compilation here from the band Wolv Serpent, Gathering Strengths / Bloodseed. I got this as a blind buy years ago. This actually came out in 2011 on Crucial Blast Records, which I'm not even sure that label is around anymore. And my buddy recommended it to me because I was a big fan of the band Ocean, not The Ocean, but Ocean from Maine, which is just insanely heavy, droning doom / there's like kind of like post-metal elements to it. This is just drone and doom. Very little in the way of percussion, lots of just droning riffs and haunting atmosphere. I would flat out call this band a drone band. Like, this is definitely in that sort of wheelhouse as like Sun O, though I would say like maybe darker. Now, this band broke up, I believe, sometime in 2016 or after 2016. They only had 2 members. Brittany McConnell, who did violins and drums, and Blake Green, who did guitars and vocals. And drums, I would say, are very minimal on here. Like, you get some tribal patterns every now and then. There's some more up-tempo stuff that briefly shows up just to kind of jolt you awake because you can kind of nod off to this, which I think is maybe kind of the idea. But the violin passages, I think, are awesome. It gives it more of like a melancholic, like kind of like melodic doom metal feel, albeit without like all the intricacies of, you know, like My Dying Bride or anything like that. It's more isolated and just kind of backed by these just monotonous, slow, plodding riffs. And again, occasional percussion. Now, what I really thought was interesting was, you know, looking up this band, I believe the initial name for this project was Pussy Gut. Sounds more appropriate for a gore grind band, or worse yet, a porno grind band, but I'm kind of glad they changed the name. But yeah, this band didn't last very long. And I mean, drone is sort of a niche market, but in terms of just menacing, dark, haunting listen, this is pretty solid. Patience is key with this though, because like all the songs on here are about 20 minutes long. 2 discs, 2 tracks each, very long songs. But if you like long builds and such and big swells of atmosphere, and if you're into drone, that would probably really help too. This is pretty solid. The stuff on Gathering Strengths was the stuff that really stood out to me. Honestly, those songs have a more like cinematic sort of vibe to them. Like, there's church bells, there's longer sections of just like ambient, you know, noise in the background, and then building behind that you get like fluttering strings, which I think sound really pretty on here. Honestly, it's probably one of the most engaging moments on there in terms of like just flat out melody. You have samples of like crickets and such. I mean, there's like a definite setting to the music itself, and I feel like it would complement some, I don't know, very, very creepy black and white film. Now, while I like the more ambient stuff, there's some good heavy sections on here, like just menacing, sludgy riffs. And they do pick up the speed, again, like a little bit. Like, it's not just a big heavy chord and then, you know, wait what feels like 15 minutes and then the next one shows up. Like, there's some, you know, like heavier sections where the picking speed picks up and it feels a little bit more aggressive, but a lot of this is just about ambience and just making dark, haunting music, and I think they did a pretty good job at it. Now, this is the only thing I own by this band. I think there's maybe like another full length out there. I'm not entirely sure, but I might hunt it down. But yeah, it had been years since I'd listened to this, and initially when I got it, I didn't like it as much just because I kind of needed like more percussion and I felt like it was just too much atmosphere. For me, there has to be like some sort of drive to kind of like keep me engaged. Like, it can't just all be ambience. But honestly, I kind of opened up to this one a little bit more, and there's enough variety on here to keep it interesting. And again, I like the more cinematic appeal of some of the later stuff. But yeah, if you're a big fan of, I mean, I guess like Sun O is probably the best comparison, maybe Earth too, and maybe even like Esoteric too. I don't know, kind of whirl all 3 of those things together. But yeah, check this out, pretty solid stuff. And that, believe it or not, does it for Idaho. Kind of a shorter one, but you know, I figured this was a good way to get kicked off in terms of States of Metal. And again, I have a whole bunch more that I already have lined up, so looking forward to getting those done as well. So if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We also have memberships now. They're only 99 cents, and we offer members only live streams. That's our lone perk, and we're trying to think of like some interesting things to talk about. Obviously, we didn't do one this month, though we might do like a New Year's stream, but that's going to be pretty much for everybody. But for the members only one, we're trying to think of like some fun topics we can actually talk about to make them kind of stand apart from our usual bullshitting streams, because that's generally what goes on in our streams. We also have really dumb emojis, which, yeah, I need to add more dumb emojis because we just don't have enough. And we still have our store, thrallsmetal.com, with our shirts and hats, and that is linked below as well. And of course, if you are interested in becoming a member of this channel, there's a join button down below as well. We would appreciate your support there if you can, but we appreciate you guys just coming by, commenting, talking to us, you know, all the stuff that has just been amazing about doing this channel over the years. It's just been this absolutely fun run that we are looking forward to continuing. Probably some retro reviews coming in the future, as well as, you know, of course, collection updates, reviews, rankings. We're getting close to shooting the Motley Crue ranking, which I'll be fucking thrilled when I'm done with that. But yeah, tons of stuff coming on this channel. So one more big thank you, because you guys are absolutely awesome, and we will catch you later.